Commander Sarah Chun stood at the threshold of the Galactic Military Academy. Her reflection fractured across the crystalline wall panels that stretched in elegant curves toward the vaulted dome above. Sunlight from 3 stars filtered through. The transparent structure refracting into shifting rivers of color that danced across the polished floor. The effect was breathtaking, almost holy, and yet Sarah found herself focusing not on the beauty, but on the echo of her boots. The sound was heavy, intrusive, out of place among the silence of polished surfaces and whispering alien attendants who drifted past like phantoms. The academy radiated refinement, but Sarah's presence felt like a scar slashed across its perfection. Perhaps that was fitting. She drew in a steady breath as the doors to the faculty wing irised open. Beyond lay the most advanced tactical minds in the galaxy, beings who had dissected warfare into elegant mathematical structures, who wielded neural-linked systems to calculate a battle's outcome before the first strike was thrown. They were, waiting for her, the human representative from a world classified as a death world, a place so violent and hostile it was considered a cosmic accident that intelligence had survived there at all. She knew before entering that their opinion of her was already written. The room was circular, its walls alive with flowing patterns of light. Seats arranged in a tiered spiral held 12 faculty members, each representing a species renowned for their mastery of combat theory. Their gazes fixed on her the moment she crossed the threshold. A dozen eyes, compound or crystalline or glowing with bioluminescence, regarded her with curiosity, disdain, and in some cases, amusement. Sarah resisted the urge to adjust her uniform to make herself seem smaller or smoother in their view. She had been here before, not in this room, but in countless barracks and briefing halls, back on Earth, when she had first broken through the glass barrier to become the youngest woman to teach advanced combat systems at the Earth Defense Force. Academy, she had felt those same stares, doubt, pity, thinly veiled contempt. Ah, the voice of Dean Sorix rolled through the chamber, a resonant hum translated by a hovering holodrone. His body was a shifting column of translucent tentacles that shimmered with shifting bioluminescent patterns. The human representative has arrived. Commander Chun, please join us. Sarah moved forward with deliberate calm, her steps resonant in the pristine chamber. She could sense how they interpreted her gait, too forceful, too heavy, unnecessarily aggressive. To them, every step of hers carried the gravity of Earth itself, a burden they could scarcely imagine. She reached the central platform and inclined, her head in the smallest of nods. "Honored colleagues," she said, her translator catching each syllable and casting it in the precise pitch and rhythm of galactic speech. "I appreciate the opportunity to join this faculty." The silence that followed was not respect, but judgment. Professor C-Tech, a towering insectoid with mandibles sharp enough to shear metal, clicked them together in open skepticism. "With all due respect, Dean, what possible combat expertise could a Deathworlder offer? Their species only stumbled into faster-than-light travel a decade ago. Their wars are primitive scraps, fought with blunt weapons and chaos." Sarah met his multifaceted eyes without flinching. "Perhaps it is precisely that chaos that makes my perspective valuable. Humanity has fought without superior technology for most of its history. We survived by fighting smart when we could not fight superior." C-Tech's antennae twitched in disbelief. Another voice joined, crystalline Professor Zura, whose body refracted the light into 1,000 shards. "Fascinating. Your kind appears to thrive on irregularity, not structure. You mistake unpredictability for strength." "Sometimes," Sarah replied evenly, "the strongest weapon is the one your enemy never sees coming." Her words caused a ripple among the faculty, not quite agreement, not quite dismissal. Dean Sorix raised a single tentacle, silencing the murmurs. The council insisted we include a human instructor after the failures against the swarm. Our doctrines could not adapt. Perhaps the human method of improvisation may prove useful. A ripple of unease spread at the mention of the swarm, the hive-mind enemy that had broken fleet after fleet with tactics no algorithm could predict. Sarah seized on the shift in the room. She could feel the tension, the need, the desperate cracks forming in their confidence. "I have prepared a preliminary curriculum," she said, activating her datapad. Holographic projections of Earth's long history of combat flared to life guerrilla warfare in jungles. Asymmetric conflicts fought with nothing but cunning and patience, desperate fighters using terrain as their weapon. The alien faculty watched. In silence, their disdain giving way to reluctant interest. Then Professor Cetek's mandibles snapped again. "These are anecdotes, not proof. Our cadets require precision, not parables. If the human wishes to teach, let her prove herself first." Dean Sorix's tentacles shimmered with approval at the suggestion. "An excellent idea. Commander Chun, tomorrow you will undertake the Omega combat simulation. It has not been attempted by an instructor in 5 cycles." A ripple of shock swept the chamber. Even Sarah knew the name. The Omega simulation was infamous, a trial so punishing that fewer than 2% of cadets survived it intact. No alien instructor dared risk their reputation on it. They thought the challenge would make her balk, as she would protest or retreat. But Sarah only inclined her head, a quiet smile flickering at the corner of her mouth. "Very well," she said. "I look forward to it." Her heart tightened in her chest, but not from fear. It was the familiar spark she had felt every time someone told her she wasn't capable. She had spent her life proving them wrong. Tomorrow would be no different. The Deathworlder had come to play their game. They didn't yet understand she was about to change the rules. The simulation chamber was a cathedral of light, a geodesic dome humming with neural interface fields that shimmered across its walls like living circuitry. Sarah stood at its center. In her standard-issue Earth Defense Force training suit, the fabric plain and warm compared to the sleek adaptive armor used by alien cadets. Above her, the observation gallery was crowded with faculty and select senior students, their alien forms leaning forward in anticipation. She could feel their hunger for confirmation that the human was an error, that the experiment of bringing a Deathworlder into their ranks would collapse under its own hubris. "Commander Chun," Dean Sorix's voice resonated through the chamber, calm and ceremonious. His tentacles rippled faintly in a pattern Sarah had learned to recognize as guarded expectation. "You are certain you wish to attempt this without enhanced combat gear? The Omega simulation is calibrated for fully equipped specialists." Sarah rolled her shoulders once, loosening the tension in her arms, and allowed herself the smallest smile. "On Earth, we trained in jungles where even the air wanted to kill you. Sometimes less is more, Dean. I'll take my chances with the basics." A sharp trill escaped Professor Cetek, unmistakably derisive. "Your funeral," he hissed, mandibles clicking. The lights dimmed. The chamber dissolved around Sarah, her neural interface plunging her into a battlescape engineered to break the strongest minds. In an instant, the pristine dome was gone, replaced by a seething horizon of chaos. The sky burned with threads of chemfire, rivers of crimson lightning slashing through clouds that seemed to scream as they rolled. The ground beneath her boots shifted like molten mercury, every step unstable. Air hung heavy with razored particles that scraped against her exposed skin, an atmosphere designed to instill panic before the first enemy even appeared. Targets emerged as shadows on her HUD, dozens of them, converging from every direction. Quantum-shifted assassin drones, their flickering forms phasing in and out of reality like nightmares half-remembered. They were built to terrify, to overwhelm. Standard doctrine dictated stabilizing their quantum frequency and engaging with. Synchronized disruptors. Sarah did not have disruptors. She crouched, dipped her gloved hand into the flowing mercury ground, and scooped a handful. The liquid burned cold against her palm, writhing like something alive. As the first drones converged, she threw it into their shifting silhouettes. The unstable matter tore through their phasing fields, collapsing them into solid form. They slammed into each other with explosive force, crumpling like toys. The observation deck erupted in a chorus of disbelief. "Impossible," Professor C-Tech muttered over the cum, his voice tight. "That countermeasure isn't in any tactical database." Sarah smirked, rolling to her feet. "That's because you're looking for technological counters. I'm looking at the environment." The simulation adapted, escalating with ruthless intent. A storm of plasma fell from the sky, burning rivers into the liquid terrain. Psychic constructs materialized in the air-faceless beings that drove barbed thoughts directly into her mind, trying to crack her defenses. Sarah's neural interface pinged useless warnings as the constructs pressed closer, their voices a discordant chorus urging surrender. Instead of fighting them with digital shielding, Sarah did what she had done on every forced march during training back on Earth. She sang. A combat cadence from the Earth Defense Force rose in her mind, simple and rhythmic. The words carried. No meaning here, but the beat gave her an anchor, a cadence the psychic intrusions could not unravel. She kept moving, one foot in front of the other, breathing in time to the song. Fascinating. Professor Zura's crystalline tones chimed. She is using primitive mnemonic rhythm to achieve what our most advanced neural fortresses were designed for. The simulation escalated further, throwing paradox weapons at her loops of time that folded back on themselves. Clones of herself lunging from the future and the past, swarm creatures swarming in impossible numbers. Sarah didn't try to outcalculate them. She didn't freeze in decision paralysis. She chose momentum. Forward. Always forward. She redirected the swarm creatures like a martial artist, using their own mass against them. She ignored her paradox doubles, knowing hesitation would kill her faster than any weapon. The faculty watched in silence as the primitive human carved her way through what no other instructor had dared attempt. Finally, the battlefield reshaped itself into the final phase. A quantum singularity hung suspended above a collapsing plane, wrapped in temporal distortions and psychic barriers. It was the Academy's ultimate trap, the unbeatable endgame. For centuries, cadets had floundered here, broken by the sheer hopelessness of the construct. Sarah stared at it only long enough to understand what it was, the perfect puzzle meant to demand impossible calculation. Then she charged. "Stop!" Professor C-Tech barked from the gallery. She'd be torn apart. Gravitational waves hammered at her body, crushing weight that should have snapped bone and shredded muscle. But Sarah had trained under Earth's relentless 1.1 grams, had marched under loads that had left her comrades vomiting from exhaustion. Her body screamed, but she kept moving, one breath, one step, one heartbeat at a time. The psychic barriers clawed at her mind, but her cadence held. When she reached the event horizon, she did not attempt to neutralize it with computation. She hurled her neural interface into the singularity itself. A cascade failure shattered the construct from within, tearing the Omega simulation apart in a burst of dissolving light. Sarah stood alone in the reformed chamber, sweat streaming down her brow, chest heaving but body unbroken. The gallery above was silent. Dean Sorix's tentacles pulsed faintly, their glow an unreadable pattern of shock and awe. Finally, he spoke, his tone hushed. "In 3,000 cycles, no one has ever done what you just did." Sarah wiped her forehead, meeting their eyes calmly. "On Earth, we have a saying. Necessity is the mother of invention. Your simulation wasn't hell. It was just another workout. A ripple passed through the faculty doubt, giving way to something else, something heavier. Respect, perhaps, or the beginnings of it. Sarah smiled faintly. Tomorrow, she thought, they would stop calling her primitive. Tomorrow, they would begin to understand what a Deathworld truly forged. The lecture hall hummed like a hive. Tiered seating spiraled upward in concentric rings, filled with cadets from every corner of the galaxy. Their bodies shimmered, clicked, pulsed, and rippled with species-specific traits. Crystalline proxim, refracting the sunlight into blinding prisms. Methane breathers encased in shimmering environmental shells, insectoid relians flexing segmented. Limbs in barely contained agitation. All eyes compound, crystalline, or luminescent were fixed on the human standing at the center of the chamber. Commander Sarah Chun wore no neural rig, no adaptive armor, no flowing cloak of hollow enhancements. Only her worn Earth Defense Force uniform, the same olive drab she had sweated in during countless drills on jungle floors and desert ridges. Compared to the gleaming precision of the Academy, she looked like a relic pulled out of a museum display. Yet, after the Omega simulation, the room was not filled with dismissive murmurs. It was filled with expectation. Today, she began, her voice steady, we are going to fail. Repeatedly. A ripple of color and sound swept across the audience, confusion, disbelief, even alarm. A Meridian cadet, their bioluminescent skin, flickering with what Sarah had learned to recognize as agitation, raised a narrow hand. Instructor, our neural interfaces register a paradox. Failure is a negative metric. How can repeated failure achieve instructional objectives? Sarah smiled faintly. That question was exactly the problem. That right there, she said, is why the swarm is beating you? The words hit like a pulse grenade. Cadets shifted in their seats, mandibles clicking, crystalline bodies refracting light in startled bursts. Even the faculty seated along the upper tier leaned forward, Professor C-Tech-S antennae twitching in sharp agitation. You think in binaries, Sarah continued. Success or failure. Victory or defeat. But survival doesn't work that way. On Earth, every predator, every storm, every plague taught us the same lesson. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of the process of survival. The holographic projector at her side flickered to life, filling the air with images from Earth's archives. Armies in ragged uniforms melting into jungles, insurgents with crude weapons toppling heavily. Armed invaders, lone fighters outmaneuvering opponents with nothing but terrain and instinct. Alien cadets leaned forward, their neural links feeding them instant data dates, names, casualty statistics, but none of the context. That was Sarah's job. You went from peaceful exploration to advanced weaponry without learning the in-between steps, she explained. You skipped the part where we fought tooth and claw, where we learned to turn sticks into spears and spears into strategies. That makes you vulnerable. The swarm isn't winning because they're stronger. They're winning because they think. The way we used to think, dynamically, desperately. She pulled a small object from her belt. Gasps rippled through the hall. It was a simple combat knife, its carbon steel blade dull compared to the molecular-edged weapons in their arsenals. She walked to the nearest defense screen, and with one quick thrust, drove the blade straight through. The shimmer of the shield distorted and collapsed entirely. Your technology evolved past the need to defend against something as simple as this, Sarah said, holding the knife steady. So you never considered it. That's your weakness. You assumed the universe would play by the rules you wrote. But it doesn't. Neither do your enemies. Neither do I. The hall was silent, save for the faint hum of the projector. A crystalline cadet raised a trembling limb. Instructor. M-neural interface is struggling to reconcile this demonstration. It suggests abandoning technological advantage is tactically disadvantageous. And yet, I find myself wanting to try. Sarah's smile widened into something genuine. That's what we call intuition. Humans survived because we learned to trust it. Sometimes your gut knows what your calculations can't process fast enough. Professor C-Tech's mandibles clicked rapidly at the back of the hall, but this time he didn't interrupt. Sarah noticed his limbs twitching, not in disdain, but in thought. She paced slowly in front of the cadets. For the next 3 hours, we'll dismantle your doctrines. You'll learn why heavy armor is sometimes deadlier to you than to your enemy. Why neural interfaces can slow your reactions instead of enhancing them. Why perfect formations are easier to break than scattered chaos. She stopped, meeting their eyes. And yes, you will fail. Again and again. That's how you'll learn to adapt. And adaptation is the only reason I'm standing here, while so many Earth soldiers are not. The next hours were a revelation. Sarah feinted against insectoid cadets until their flawless defense collapsed under a trick as old as boxing. She threw crystalline cadets off balance with nothing more than a shove, their rigid training unable to adjust. She demonstrated how alien armor designed to absorb quantum disruptors was helpless against a stone hurled with the right leverage. Every time a cadet fell, every time a perfect algorithm failed, their shock gave way to something new understanding. The session finally ended. The cadets no longer sat in stiff, symmetrical rows. They stood in loose circles, murmuring to each other, their bodies held with a newfound fluidity. Even Professor C-Tech, who had stayed to observe, remained at his seat long after others had left, his compound eyes fixed on Sarah's knife dot as the last of the students filed out. Dean Sorix floated at the entrance, his tentacles pulsing with patterns Sarah hadn't yet deciphered. Commander Chun, his translator hummed softly, "What you've shown here, it challenges everything we thought we knew about combat evolution." Sarah sheathed her knife, her expression calm, but her heart thrumming with the old rhythm. "A vindication. Good," she said. "Because if the swarm taught us anything, it's that what you think you know is exactly what will get you killed." The dean studied her in silence, and inclined slightly, an almost imperceptible bow. For the first time since she had arrived, Sarah felt the weight of skepticism shift into something heavier, something rarer. Respect. The Academy's crystalline halls, usually silent save for the whisper of flowing light and the soft pulse of neural conduits, erupted with the shrill blare of an emergency alert. Red luminescence flooded the corridors in jagged waves, shattering the usual calm into chaos. Cadets scrambled toward their muster points, mandibles clicking in alarm, crystalline bodies refracting the crimson glare like shattered glass. Sarah Chun was already moving before the second tone sounded, her instincts older and sharper than any neural prompt. Earth had trained her to respond to danger not with hesitation, but with motion dot by the time she reached the strategic command. Center, the chamber was a storm of voices and overlapping data streams. Holographic projections dominated the Air-3 massive swarm-high ships, jagged silhouettes pulsing with hostile intent, tearing through the Arcturus sector defense grid as though it were made of paper. Beams of quantum disruptor fire splashed harmlessly against their shifting hulls. Defensive screens buckled and dissolved. The tactical board was a massacre, unfolding in real time. "Our disruptors have no effect," Professor C-Tech was reporting. Mandibles clicking so rapidly, they became an almost continuous rattle. "They have adapted, restructuring their absorption fields to disperse the energy. Our tactical matrices cannot calculate a viable countermeasure." Sarah pushed through the gathered faculty, her eyes fixed on the hologram. The 3 ships moved like predators, absorbing every attack, bleeding the defenders dry with every exchange. She studied the way the hulls flared at each impact, the way the swarm adjusted their formations in fluid synchrony. Her stomach clenched. This wasn't just adaptation. It was worse. They're not just dispersing energy, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the din. They're feeding on it. Every shot you fire, every joule of power you throw at them, you're strengthening their systems. You're making them faster. The room fell silent. Dean Sorix's tentacles rippled with a frantic pattern Sarah had not seen before, the translation drone struggling to keep pace. You are saying our entire defense doctrine based on overwhelming force has become their weapon? Sarah nodded. Grimly. Exactly. The faculty exchanged glances, compound eyes and crystalline facets flashing with disbelief and dread. To abandon escalation was heresy. For centuries, their strategy had been singular. Build stronger weapons, bigger shields, faster computers. The swarm had turned that foundation into quicksand. What do you suggest, Commander? Sorix asked at last, his translator trembling with urgency. Sarah didn't hesitate. Give me command of the Third Fleet, and I want the cadets who've been training under me, especially the ones who've started to think outside your precious matrices. Professor C-Tech's mandibles snapped in outrage. Absurd! The Third Fleet is armed with our most advanced weaponry. To entrust it to primitive tactics is exactly what the swarm won't expect. Sarah cut him off, her tone like steel striking steel. They've adapted to your doctrine, but they haven't seen mine. The command center buzzed with conflicting signals of shock, disbelief, and beneath it all hope. Dean Sorix's skin shifted through a cascade of shades before settling into the deep cobalt of final decision. Do it, he ordered, his translator ringing with finality. Whatever you need, Commander, you have it. Within minutes, Sarah stood aboard the command deck of the Third Fleet's flagship, surrounded by a cadre of alien cadets who had absorbed her lessons with almost frightening eagerness. Their eyes glowed with nervous energy, their bodies tense with anticipation. She looked at them and saw not soldiers trained to obey doctrine, but predators learning to trust instinct. All right, she said, bringing up a tactical display. The swarm ships loomed ahead like living mountains. They expect us to hit them with everything we've got. Instead, we're going to make them think we're broken, damaged, desperate. Her cadets exchanged uneasy glances, but they leaned in closer. Sarah outlined the plan quickly. Minimal power to weapons, evasive maneuvers that mimicked crippled systems, no use of defensive screens. Instead, power would be diverted to engines, mobility prioritized over raw strength. They would strike like wolves in coordinated bursts, bleeding the prey rather than confronting it head-on. Minutes later, the Third Fleet emerged from slipspace. To the observing enemy, the ships appeared erratic, underpowered, limping into the battlefield like easy targets. The swarm pivoted, their hulls glowing with the hunger of absorption fields, ready to gorge themselves. They're powering up their main batteries, a cadet reported, his voice trembling. Should we raise shields? Negative, Sarah sighed. Her gaze never wavered from the shifting hologram. Remember what I taught you. Sometimes the best defense isn't a stronger shield. It's not being where the blow lands. The first swarm salvo lit space with devastating brilliance, tearing through the void toward them. But the Third Fleet didn't meet it with walls of light. They danced. Ships wove through the storm with impossible agility, engines screaming, trajectories shifting with Predator's grace. Every attack met empty space. Every counterstrike from Sarah's fleet was a feint, a shallow wound forcing the swarm to flare their absorption fields again and again. Sarah's lips curled into a thin smile. The Wolf pack was circling. The hunt had begun. Space burned with the light of weapons fire, yet the Third Fleet moved as if it were a living thing, fluid, unpredictable, wild. To the untrained eye, their formation looked like a scatter of prey animals fleeing before predators. To Sarah Chun, it was a pack hunt, every maneuver deliberate, every feint a probe, every strike a bleed. minimal power. She barked, gripping the command rail as her flagship spun through the void on a trajectory that made the neural linked officers in the gallery back at the academy physically flinch. "We're not here to smash them. We're here to exhaust them." The cadets around her worked furiously, not with flawless precision, but with something the aliens had only begun to understand: instinct. A crystalline navigator flicked refracted. Light signals to sister ships, improvised flashes that carried more meaning than any coded transmission. A Meridian weapons officer fired not at the swarm's vital systems, but at peripheral plating, just enough to force the enemy to flare their absorption fields. Each microstrike was insignificant on its own. Together, they drained the swarm, forcing them to sustain defenses for far longer than they were designed to. On the holographic display, the first swarm high ship flickered. Its absorption fields, once smooth, began to stutter like a faltering heartbeat. "They're slowing." Professor C-Tech's voice crackled over the long-range disbelief lacing every syllable. He was still watching from the academy, mandibles clattering audibly. "Their energy intake is no longer compensating for expenditure. This should not be possible." "It's persistence hunting," Sarah said, calm and fierce all at once. "It's how humans brought down Prey 10. Times our size. You don't need to be stronger. You just need to last longer." The second phase of her plan unfolded. Weapons crews load debris fields. Forget your disruptors. Pick up whatever wreckage is floating out here and throw it at them. Gasps erupted over the comms. To launch junk at a high ship was barbaric, primitive, disgraceful. And yet, one by one, the ships complied, tractor beams latching onto chunks of shattered hulls, derelict freighters, even asteroid fragments. Under Sarah's orders, they flung them at relativistic speeds. The swarm's absorption fields flared, then failed. They had been optimized for energy signatures, for quantum disruptors and plasma fire. They had no answer for raw mass and momentum. The debris smashed into them, carving craters through their sleek hulls. "Direct hits," shouted a cadet, bioluminescent patterns strobing across their body in exhilaration. "Their formation is breaking." Sarah allowed herself a tight nod. "Good. Now Phase 3. The wolf pack closed in. Smaller ships darted around the crippled high ships, striking at joints, engines, and exposed segments before darting away again. Their movements weren't elegant. They were brutal, chaotic, unpredictable. To the swarm's collective intelligence, it was noise they couldn't pattern. And noise, Sarah knew, was deadly. One by one, the high ships faltered. The first split apart under the relentless battering, its absorption fields collapsing entirely before it detonated in a silent blossom of light. The second staggered, listing under the cumulative impact of debris strikes, until cadets swarmed it like predators on a weakened beast, tearing it open with coordinated runs. The third tried to retreat, but the pack circled, harried, and bled it until its systems gave out and it drifted helplessly into the void. Hours later, the silence of victory settled over the fleet. Where 3 swarm high ships had once loomed, only drifting wreckage remained. The third fleet had lost only 2 vessels, a miracle by galactic standards, though to Sarah it was simply proof that the hunt had gone as planned. On the command deck, the cadets looked at her not as an outsider, not as a primitive Deathworlder, but as the leader of the hunt. Their eyes glowed with something she had seen before in her old comrades back on Earth, the fierce joy of survival earned by grit. Not gifted by superior weapons. In the Academy's command center, Dean Sorix's tentacles hung utterly still, the equivalent of speechless awe. Professor Zura's crystalline body pulsed with refracted light, his voice faint with wonder. 3 high ships, defeated by debris and evasive maneuvers. Centuries of doctrine undone in hours. And Professor C-Tech, once her most vocal critic, whispered the words none of them thought he could. You turned war into a hunt. You treated them not as equations, but as prey. Sarah stood on the deck, hands braced against the rail, eyes locked on the drifting carcasses of the swarm vessels. Her voice was low, steady, meant as much for herself as for anyone listening. Victory doesn't always go to the strongest or the most advanced. It goes to those who adapt. And now you've all seen how. The wolf pack had drawn blood, and the galaxy would never fight the same way again. The Academy's grand demonstration arena thrummed with energy. Tier upon tier of dignitaries filled the viewing platforms, their bodies gleaming beneath the 3 suns that streamed through the arena's open dome. The space had been designed for ceremony, for parades of advanced war machines, for precise, choreographed displays of doctrine, for the kind of order the galaxy prized above all else. But today, the floor below was stripped bare. No shimmering neural grids, no tactical matrices, no gleaming armories. Only cadets drawn from every species represented at the Academy stood in loose clusters, waiting. Sarah Chun walked out into the center. Her boots struck the stone floor with their usual weight, a sound that now carried less derision and more recognition. The cadets straightened at her approach, instinctively shifting to the relaxed but alert postures she had drilled into them. Gone was the rigid symmetry of textbook formations. They stood like hunters, coiled, balanced, unpredictable. Dean Sorix's voice rolled through the air, solemn yet tinged with something he would once never have admitted: pride. Esteemed members of the Council, honored faculty, and representatives of our allied fleets. 1 year ago, our Academy nearly broke under the pressure of the swarm. Our doctrines, perfected over centuries, failed against chaos. It was then that Commander Sarah Chun, Deathworlder of Earth, offered a perspective we had dismissed. Today, you will see the result of her teachings. A low murmur swept the tiers. Skepticism hung heavy in the air, but curiosity outweighed it. Sarah lifted her chin and nodded to her cadets. Begin. The demonstration opened with single combats. A crystalline Proxim cadet, once fragile and defensive, used their natural refraction to bend light around their body, slipping out of sight before striking with a simple kinetic blade. Gasps rose from the crowd as the strike pierced a simulated energy field, something no conventional disruptor could have achieved. Next, a Meridian cadet stepped forward. Their bioluminescence flared, dazzling and chaotic, creating bursts of confusion as they wove between holographic foes. Where cloaking devices once failed, raw biology triumphed, weaponized under Sarah's tutelage. One by one, cadets displayed techniques born not of doctrine, but of instinct, each alien strength amplified by primitive logic. Insectoid cadets used feints and grappling maneuvers that ignored their usual dependence on armor. Amphibious recruits fought in erratic rhythm, breaking the predictability of neural guidance. None of it was elegant. None of it was perfect. And all of it worked. The final act unfolded as the cadets faced a full simulation of swarm constructs. They did not form the rigid phalanxes their instructors once demanded. They flowed together, a pack of predators circling prey. A crystalline cadet blinded the enemy with refracted beams while Aurelian dropped low, sweeping in to disable legs. A methane breather smashed into the fray with sheer bulk, while a Meridian darted in under the cover of light. Each exploited what the others could not. Together, they overwhelmed. The simulation ended in silence. The floor was littered with fading holographic wreckage. The cadets stood tall, breathing hard but triumphant. For a long moment, no one in the stand spoke. Then the council chamber erupted in overlapping voices, disbelief warring with recognition. They're using Class 13 Deathworld tactics. One counselor hissed. Blending them with advanced technology, another corrected. It is effective. Professor Seatek, once her loudest critic, rose slowly from his seat at the back. His mandibles clicked, but this time not in derision. He made his way down to the arena floor, ignoring the stir his movement caused. He stopped before Sarah, lowering his compound eyes to her level. "I was wrong," he said, each word clicking like stone against stone. "We thought your kind primitive, but it was we who were blind. You've shown us that our reliance on technology was weakness." He glanced at the knife she still carried at her hip. "Perhaps you could demonstrate that defense technique again." A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the dignitaries, but Sarah only smiled. "Better yet, Professor," she said, sliding the blade free and offering it hilt first. "I'll show you how to counter it, because the enemy of today may be the ally of tomorrow." Dean Sorix's tentacles pulsed in brilliant, proud patterns as he addressed the council. "You have seen the evidence. This academy, once bound by rigidity, now produces warriors who can adapt as quickly as they can strike. We propose that this doctrine be adopted across all fleets of the council." The council members conferred briefly, their gestures sharp, their voices tense. Then their spokesperson stepped forward, crystalline eyes gleaming. "The results are undeniable. The doctrine shall be implemented, and Commander Chun." The representative bowed their head, slowly, deliberately. "We request you oversee the transition." The hall thundered with overlapping voices shock, dissent, admiration, but Sarah only stood still, knife at her side, expression calm. She had come as an unwanted outsider, tolerated as a curiosity. Now she was being asked to reshape the galaxy's military itself. Above, cadets still lingered in loose clusters, sparring lightly even after the demonstration's end. They laughed, stumbled, failed, corrected each other. Their instincts were raw, imperfect, but alive. Sarah watched them with the same quiet confidence she'd carried into the Omega simulation. The galaxy was beginning to understand what Earth had always known, that true strength did not lie in the sharpest blade or the strongest shield. It lay in the refusal to give up, in the ability to adapt, in the courage to fail and rise stronger. And the cadets were proof. The suns were setting when the council's decision rippled through the academy. Gold, violet, and crimson light bled through the crystalline walls as though the very sky had broken open in celebration. Cadets filled the courtyards below Sarah Chun's office, sparring in mismatched pairs, their movements loose and adaptive. She watched from the balcony as a crystalline proxim stumbled against the feint of a Aurelian insectoid, only to recover with a dazzling refracted counterstrike. A meridian bioluminescent pulse threw another match into chaos, and both cadets collapsed. Laughing, the sight tightened Sarah's chest. They were learning not just to fight, but to improvise, to embrace failure as a weapon, not a weakness. Dean Sorix floated to her side, tentacles shifting in slow, contemplative patterns. "When you first arrived, Commander, we thought you crude. A curiosity. Now." He trailed off, and the translation drone hesitated, searching for words. "Now I wonder if we were the primitives hiding behind doctrine, afraid to face the chaos of survival without equations to protect us." Sarah smiled faintly, though her eyes remained on the cadets. "We all have something to learn. Humanity needed your technology. You needed our perspective. Together we're stronger than either of us could ever be alone." The dean pulsed with a color Sarah had come to recognize as agreement. Before either could say more, the chamber doors hissed open. A hush swept across the room. A figure entered flanked by security drones sleek, jagged, and unmistakably alien. The atmosphere shifted instantly. A swarm emissary. The faculty stiffened, mandibles clicking, crystalline bodies sparking in alarm. Even Sorix's tentacles faltered into a chaotic pattern of unease. Yet the emissary moved with no aggression, only deliberate calm. Its body was a lattice of chitin and biometal, its multifaceted eyes glimmering with unsettling intelligence. When it spoke, its voice was a layered chorus, translated into the chamber's air. "We came to understand," it said simply. The words sent a ripple through the faculty, disbelief and suspicion mingling in equal measure. Sarah studied the emissary. Closely, every instinct on edge. For months, the swarm had been the galaxy's nightmare, a force that adapted, consumed, and overwhelmed. Now, here was one of its voices. Standing in the heart of the academy she had reshaped. "You wonder why Earth was named a death world," the emissary continued, its compound eyes locking onto Sarah. "We always wondered, too. We believed it was the ferocity of your planet, the predators, the storms, the endless struggle. But now we see. It is not the world that makes you dangerous. It is the way it taught you to think." A murmur passed through the faculty, a dozen alien languages whispering the same question. Was this respect or warning? Sarah didn't flinch. "And what have you learned from that?" she asked. The emissary tilted its head, the movement insectile, unervingly precise. "That you can adapt faster than we can consume. That your strength is not in weapons, but in turning disadvantage into victory. We cannot calculate you." Professor Cetek's mandibles clattered, the sound sharp with alarm. "Then why are you here? To surrender? Or to study us more closely, so you can adapt again?" The emissary's eyes gleamed, reflecting 100 fractured lights. "Both." The word fell like a blade. The chamber froze. Even Sarah felt her heart hammer once, sharp and cold. Both. Surrender and study. Respect and threat. But then, to her own surprise, she smiled. Not the grim satisfaction of victory, but something softer, sharper. "Good," she said. "Because if you can learn from us, then maybe you can also learn peace. Adaptation doesn't have to mean war. It can mean survival for all of us." The emissary stared at her, unreadable, then inclined its head. The gesture was alien, but unmistakably deliberate. Around her, the faculty shifted uneasily. For them, this was a terrifying revelation. The enemy standing in their halls, not broken but curious, not defeated but watching. For Sarah, it was the final confirmation of everything she had fought to prove. The swarm had come to study, to adapt, to change. She turned back to the balcony as the cadets laughed and sparred in the courtyard below. The stars above were beginning to pierce the violet dusk. The galaxy was changing. Not because Earth had brought its deadliest weapons, but because Earth had brought its deadliest lesson, survival through adaptation. And as Sarah watched the emissary linger in the academies, light, she knew this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning.